I'm sitting here with Rav Cardozo, and in his home in Beit Vagan, and the music is turned off. But as I said, previous discussions, there's always music playing in his house. This spectacular classical music, and what did you say in one of your articles? It's like a right-hand punch. What you had this like a
about Bach. Yeah, when you have heard Bach, you get unconscious.
I love that thought. So what I want to do is I want to quote a passage of a very important thinker that I have been writing about for the last 2 years, called Rabbi Shagar, who passed away in 2007. He was a Rosh Yeshiva. He was almost killed in the Yom Kippur War. 2 of his friends died in the tank, and he survived. He was burnt very badly on his arms. And the more and more I read him, the more I see similarities between you and him. And it's a tragedy you never met him, because you were in Israel at the same time. But sometimes we get to know figures through their writings even more than in person. So I want to read a passage of his which reminded me something about you, and I want to hear your thoughts. Okay, so this is Rav Shagar. It is impossible to change the entire world. However, within the reality one lives in, it is possible to build a small space, an island, and inside of this a person can create a unique social dynamic, perhaps even between the students of a yeshiva. I do not believe that we as individuals are able to totally change a society. First, we must change ourselves, we must produce self-transcendence, we must succeed to create a new perspective and kindness between ourselves, and only after this can we change the world. Perhaps this is the reason why communism failed. It attempted to change in one go an entire society, but it is impossible to change the world before you change the psychology of the individual. Therefore, first there must be an individual transformation, and on top of this will come universal transformation.
I fully agree with that. That's the way how it works. Any kind of ideology which wants to solve all problems in one shot, we have seen over the years, whether it is socialism, communism, or any other ism, it never worked. It was Sir Isaiah Berlin who wrote a lot about liberty. Sir Isaiah Berlin was one of the great philosophers in England from Russian background, who was a proud Jew, but not religious, but very, I say, Jewish in his approach on many levels. Just as a side note, he used to, on Yom Kippur, to go to shul. So somebody once said to him, "What are you doing here? You don't even believe in God." And he didn't give any answer. And 5 minutes later, he turned around. He says, "Well, after all, perhaps it is true." And he was a great philosopher. He once said, you have to realize one thing. There are no ideal solutions to the problems of this world. How much justice and how much shalom, how much peace, how much of this and how much of that. On the end, you have to make a trade-off. There is no such thing as something which ideologically will work. Proof, communism. It thought that it was able to solve all the problems of the world, and it only added to it. And that is true about anything. I would even say that is true about the Jewish tradition. The Jewish tradition does not hold all the answers to the problems which we have, but it gives us guidelines. And I think one of the beautiful things about the Jewish tradition is that there are so many differences of opinion within the Jewish tradition, which exactly makes that point. There are no ideal answers to questions or issues, especially moral issues. Morality from one point of view may work well, and then you look at from another point of view and you say, well, it's completely immoral because I have to balance between 2 opposing paradoxical moral criteria which stand in the way of each other, and there is no solution. So he speaks about the trade-off, and I believe that that is very true about all these specific issues. So yes, you can only start with yourself. You can only start with your students. And again, you have to give this openness to the students to go their own way, but lay the foundations for them. If you don't do that, then on the end, you will not be left with anything when you did not make any contribution because you were too ideological and too naive in the way how you thought you could solve that kind of a problem.
I want to respond to you by thinking out loud about something that you have every week called the Think Tank, which I've actually never been to. I've heard whispers about it. It's almost like a secret society, Rav Cardozo. You have to be invite only. And I very much admire the idea of people getting together. You've organized, and in a small group, not advertising it really, and just sitting and talking about deep ideas week in, week out. And that is the way we change the world. Not by millions of people, or 100,000 people sitting in a stadium hearing a speech that will just go away after, and after they eat food, they'll forget it. But to sit with people and give them your attention, 10 people, and that is really, those quality conversations impacts people. So I want to ask you about your own educational goals. I know you have toured the world and you do, go around the world, but in many ways, you've sat in Jerusalem the majority of your life now and taught students. Do you feel that there's that tension in your own life? Should I just always be running around the world giving lectures, or should I just stay in Jerusalem with the students who I know and give them my full attention? Do you feel that tension yourself?
Yes, there's definitely tension there. First of all, I think that what a teacher needs to do is to plant seeds. And probably more than that he can't do than that. And then there are circumstances where perhaps you can't do it to the extent you would like to do. That's definitely true about my case. I'm quite limited because of all sort of family circumstances. So I can't do much anymore. I used to travel for 7-8 weeks in America from one day to the next, sitting every day in an aeroplane and giving a lecture somewhere. How effective this has been, I don't know. People tell me it was very effective. I have my doubts. But that is something...
You also publish books and send them around the world. Is that also a question for you? How much does a person reading a page of your writings across the world impact their life? Would it be more powerful for you to sit with them one-on-one? Is that something you think about a lot? Because I know you're always trying to communicate your ideas.
I think you have to do both. Because after all, if you have 10, 20, 30 students around you, it is very limited. And you have a limited impact, but only on these people, and you can then only hope that there will be some kind of legacy where they take your stuff and they start to move it forward and to develop it and so on. And that's one of the things which I hope that will happen with my teachings. But at the same time, the books are important because today they can get to anywhere in the world, especially with internet and with all the other media possibilities. So one has to do that. Most people, and perhaps this sounds a little arrogant, but I hope it to be true, I've seen that people who are no longer alive have now more influence than when they were still alive. Take Eliezer Berkowitz, who was more or less completely ignored. Today there's definitely much more talk about it. There are rabbis like Rav Hirschensohn, one of the great Halachic personalities of 100 years ago. There are also people which it needs time before they really become influential. Same thing is true about, I come from Holland, so I'm very influenced by art. So take Rembrandt van der Rijn, the famous Rembrandt, right, who is now considered the biggest painter ever. Unbelievable. Yes, at the time he had a very difficult situation. He couldn't even pay his macollet because people wouldn't pay anymore for what now will go, his paintings, for millions of dollars, because at the time it was not appreciated. And I think that happens in many other fields. So it needs time, that one day, and that has to do a lot with, you can call it muzzle, you can call it shata d'ishmaya, whatever it is, that one day somebody picks up and says, wow, here is something which we haven't seen for the last 100 years. Typical example of that is the Mehashiloach of the Ishbitzer, one of the most remarkable Hasidic texts, which he could not at the time even publish with a Jewish publisher because they refused to do it because it was too unconventional. Today, people in Hebrew University write PhDs on him, and now he became suddenly one of the biggest people in the Hasidic thinking world.
Well, I would think this connects very much to the first Rav Shagar piece I read you, and that if a person really invests their time in quality ideas and communication with even a limited amount of people, but really strong, high-quality relationships and ideas, eventually it can transform the whole world. But if it's thin and you're just trying to get your name out there and spread your ideas, but you haven't done the hard work of actually sitting and thinking about it, ultimately, what have you done? So in that way, I think your ideas, because you've been writing for 20, 30, probably more, 30 years, and as time goes on, I just see them impacting more and more people. But after reading them for so many years, I can see you did so much hard work individually all those years in Gateshead, in the Mir Yeshiva, that it didn't come out of the first time you heard an idea, I'm going to spread it to the world. You really, built strong roots. And I think that's something very important for teachers and educators, not to straight away say, I want to go teach everybody. They have to go and transform themselves and the people around them.
Yeah, I think that's also because when you get older, then many of the ideas which you have learned over the years, they come together subconsciously in your mind, and they start to create new ideas which you didn't think of at the time when you learned these texts. That's the reason why if I today learn a Daf Gemara, I look to it totally different from the way as I did when I was learning in Gateshead or Mir Yeshiva. Why? Because suddenly I start to realize, hey, wait a moment, what is happening over here? I read between the lines. And I start to understand there's a whole hashkafa, a whole Weltanschauung, an outlook to life behind all this, which at the time nobody taught us in the yeshiva world, because it was only what was written, and the Brisker method, which I loved, but I think it's totally wrong. But that's a different story. And I still learn like that, but my interest in learning Talmud is therefore very different from what most also people learn Talmud with, because I'm looking for what is not written over there, because that's where the real thing is to be discovered.
But you are a person who invested so much time in individual transformation, in thinking through ideas, in praying, in taking prayer seriously, in going to yeshiva, that now as you have gotten older, there's just so much power to your ideas. How exactly that came about, it's a good question. You describe the subconscious, but it's a fact. A human being like you, it's such a rich Torah. There's such maturity, like a fine wine. And I think that fits very well with this idea we're talking about, which is not by just trying to change the world in a general way it comes about. It's through hard individual work that it eventually...
Yes, but there's something in my case which perhaps is true about others as well, and it is this, my background. And that is that I was raised in a completely secular society, and I was raised on the Birkayim, how do you say Birkayim in English?
Knees.
The knees of Spinoza, which I still read this very day. Also, I disagree with him on many issues, but there were big people I read as a young man, which have deeply influenced me. And also there was a time when I rejected them altogether. I now realize how much influence they have had also on the way how I look to the Jewish tradition. I know the Jewish tradition very well. In many ways I'm an insider, but I also stay an outsider. And the fact that I stay an outsider means that I can see things which others don't see. And that makes it for me attractive, because then I can teach it in a different way than others can. But that has a lot to do with the fact that I come from the background I come from.